Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this Tuesday. It is the 4th of August. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line, of course, is always open at 800-472-0391. You can find information during your day and in between the Alaska Weather Show on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. On Twitter, of course, we were sharing a little while ago from the NWS Anchorage and NWS Alaska accounts that new record high temperatures have been broken and that 2015 is now ranking among one of the top 5 warmest for days with temperatures above 70 degrees in Anchorage and tied for days with temperatures above 80 degrees. So if you use that as just kind of a very casual benchmark, it's been a pretty warm summer for 2015 here in South Central Alaska. And in NWS Alaska on Facebook, you would have seen some of that information as well as a look at some of the other record high temperatures that were in danger. Now, on the other side of the scale, we're still dealing with sea ice up across the Beaufort Seacoast. And for communities east of Prudhoe Bay out toward Kaktovik, a lot of this ice is kind of staying around a while and making it a little bit difficult to get in barge traffic. So if you're watching the ice in Barrow, you're very close to that sea ice edge. A lot of this is melting in place and slowly drifting to the south and west. And probably by the end of the week and into the weekend, what we see around the Hannah Shoal will probably be gone at this point, thanks to the melting temperatures there. But the progress is very slow to the south and west and nearly melting in place. However, later on in the weekend, it looks like some of this may start to shift just a little bit more to the north and east. Now, every day, our sea ice experts at the Alaska National Weather Service analyze this for you, as well as concentrations, sea surface temperatures. You can get all of this information and more with their discussion on the 5-day trend at weather.gov/Anchorage/ice.php. And as always, we'll review this right before our marine weather segment at the end of the show. Your fire danger right now is expanding once again with dry weather across southwest, south central, and parts of the interior. High levels of fire danger are found here and there across the Copper River Basin, the Kenai Mountains, and around the eastern Alaska Range, as well as the Yukon Valley. I'll look for that to continue a little bit. However, don't get too excited or worried just yet, as cooler and wetter weather is dropping southward with 2 waves of cold air dropping into the Chukchi Seacoast and then, of course, into the interior as we head toward the weekend, and you'll see that here in just a moment. Here's a look at the satellite picture out across the Pacific, and you'll see an area of low pressure south of the central and western Aleutians. This is slowly working its way eastward, and it's not going to make a whole lot of progress northward at this point, thanks to high pressure being very stable, rough, tough, and hard to bluff right over the central Bering Sea. That's keeping in fog and low stratus, and you don't see that very well in this satellite view. However, this low pressure system will work on the southern end of that and try and work its way toward the western sections of the Gulf of Alaska in coming days. In the meantime, we don't pick it up very well here in this view, but let's see if we can find it on the visible satellite picture. Watch for some movement out of the north and west with colder air dropping across the Chukchi Seacoast and into the Yukon Valley in the next 24 hours. You'll notice that we've got a little bit of a wave dropping south and east, and this is going to continue working toward the Alaska Range in the coming days, replacing the clear, dry, sunny weather we've had across a large part of the interior with more clouds and a better chance for at least a few showers and maybe some thunderstorms. Out across southeastern Alaska, most of the heavier cloud cover has been confined to the southern third of the panhandle there, and that's where we've seen some showery weather. Most areas northward have experienced very warm weather, and once again, Juneau saw temperatures in the 70s today. Hopefully, all of you are still watching and haven't melted away. Out across the northern Gulf, very dry weather there, helping to keep temperatures toasty in northern parts of southeast and the capital city. And we've had some pretty fair and hot weather across south central. And once again, record high temperatures were set in Anchorage, very close to those levels, maybe exceeding it in Palmer. However, the clouds that sat around southwestern Alaska, including Iliamna and King Salmon, prevented high temperatures from reaching record levels today. Just to the south of Kodiak, folks there wondering what record high temperatures are we talking about. You're under clouds once again thanks to low pressure sitting just south of the island there, and you can see that spinning and sloshing cloud cover in from the north. Meanwhile, wraparound clouds and some light precipitation have been working their way over areas south of Lake Iliamna and points around the Alaska Peninsula. Once again, you can see the fog and stratus just pretty much covering from tip to tail all the way around the Bering Sea. And again, the clear skies we've seen across parts of the central and eastern interior allowed a very warm day for most areas there. Temperatures around Fairbanks made it into the upper 70s once again, 78 in Juneau, and places like Kenai hit 76. So toasty all the way around where you didn't see clouds today. Today's weather map shows a frontal boundary sitting right around the Brooks Range. Low pressure just south and east of Arctic Village at 1,015 millibars is moving south and east. Low pressure across the Gulf of Alaska trying to work northward. It's not going to get a whole lot further north. And then we see clouds draining out of southeast very slowly with a north and northwesterly wind and some light rain showers there across parts of the Clarence Strait and the southern third of the Panhandle. High pressure is in place across the Bering Sea at 1,027 millibars, and cooler air is dropping southward. That's going to push that leading edge of colder air a little bit further into Norton Sound tonight, also into the interior, and behind that some areas of fog and stratus should be expected, but watch for most of the precipitation to be north of the Brooks Range in the form of light rain. We may see some light rainfall move up into the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. Homer could be one of those places. Kodiak Island also looking for an opportunity for some light rain. Showers confined to areas around the Dixon entrance and southeast, otherwise a dry but maybe a few more cloudy patches there for the northern parts of the Panhandle. Warmer air is lifting into the central and northern parts of the Yukon, and high pressure still in place across the Bering Sea. That return flow on the western side, though, is bringing in that warmer, wetter air, and with that comes a chance for some showers across places like Kiska and Attu. And by tomorrow, the front from that incoming wave will be a little bit closer to Adak and Atka, and wind should come up a little bit more from the east, so watch for some small craft advisories there. Colder air will try and work its way across the Alaska Range. It's going to have trouble. The Arctic is trying to wake up a little bit here, so we're starting to get kind of the first taste of, dare I say, fall weather moving southward, but it's not really cold enough to make a huge impact just yet in the sensible weather, other than dropping temperatures back into maybe where we would consider them normal for this time of August. So mid to upper 60s wouldn't be a big surprise for Thursday and Friday there, with showers and thunderstorms popping up with the added lift there, oomph, from that cold front slicing through. We have a better chance for some light rain developing later in the week for southeastern Alaska. That could start on Friday, and showers and thunderstorms will be a little more likely across some of the higher terrain, with drier weather developing once again across the lower and middle Yukon. Another wave of cooler weather seems to be shaping up for the Chukchi Seacoast and the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. With that comes another round of areas of clouds and maybe some light showers there, with high pressure moving across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. That should continue the melting across some of the areas with the ice, and maybe a slow shift there once the winds shift direction a little bit later in the week following that frontal passage. Let's look at your surface weather. Let's take a look at temperatures across most of the region. You'll notice current weather across southeastern Alaska made it into the low to mid 60s for most of central and southern parts of the Panhandle, but it's not too hard to figure out where the sun was blasting today. Areas around Angoon and northward toward Juneau saw temperatures in the mid to upper 70s. Haines and Skagway were in the upper 60s today, 65 for Yakutat. Prince William Sound, toasty but not too far off the mark, mid to upper 60s there. Around the Anchorage Bowl, Kenai, into the Matanuska and Susitna Valleys, temperatures soared into the mid to upper 70s. Looked like Chulitna was 79 degrees. Healy saw 77. Fort Greely was 80 degrees on the mark. Same goes for Gulkana, 78 in Fairbanks, 77 around Fort Yukon, 82 in Eagle. By all accounts, a pretty warm day for most Alaskans there. 74 degrees, or 77 I should say, around Fort Yukon, 54 around Anaktuvik Pass. Lower 40s for most of the Beaufort Seacoast from Barrow west. It was 40 degrees at Point Barrow. Mid 40s around Fort Wainwright, or Wainwright I should say, 58 around Kivalina, and 57 for Kotzebue, with Tin City showing temperatures just below 50 degrees. It was 50 around Gamble and St. Lawrence Island. Lower to mid 50s for Unalakleet. Grayling was showing 70, 81 in McGrath, a little bit more toward the interior, allowed you to get much warmer. 52 for Nunivak Island, and areas around Bristol Bay saw a little bit of a split. It was 75 in Dillingham, with 66 though in King Salmon, so no new record high temperature for you. The Alaska Peninsula saw readings in the 50s and 60s, a little bit warmer along the Pacific side, 54 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, mid-50s for Adak and Atka, also fairly warm for you, and 48 out around Shemya. Now, overnight low temperatures will stay in the lower to mid-50s for most areas along the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys. Once you get into the middle Tanana Valley, temperatures may be just a little bit shy of 60 degrees. South central temperatures in the lower 50s tonight, lower 50s for southeast, the Arctic coast, looking at most areas above the freezing mark, but just by a hair or so. Last night, Barrow saw temperatures in the mid-30s. Southwestern temperatures in the upper 40s to lower 50s into Bristol Bay, the Pribilofs in the upper 40s, the Alaska Peninsula region in the lower 50s, and the central and western chain will cool off into the upper 40s. High temperatures tomorrow will bounce back into the lower 70s, but it won't be as warm as it was yesterday for most of the interior. There may be a few places like Fort Greely or points east could reach into the lower 80s, but those places will be fewer and further between than what we saw today. Temps in the south central region and the Kenai Peninsula will soar once again into the mid-70s, but we're not expecting record levels. It may be close, but probably not topping those. Prince William Sound will also warm into the mid-60s, southeast, pretty close to what you saw today. A few stations up north, including Haines and Skagway, and perhaps Juneau, will be closer to that 70-degree mark. Southwestern temperatures in Bristol Bay in the upper 60s to mid-70s. Kodiak looking at 59 to about 63 degrees. The Alaska Peninsula and the chain probably lower to mid-50s in most cases, and the Arctic coast closer to 40. Flying weather now shows IFR conditions following the front for the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. A few showers and storms may develop as that first wave moves through the interior. Watch for IFR across some parts of the Yukon Delta, and things should improve the further south you go. IFR conditions around Kodiak Island and especially along the Bering Sea coast for the central and western chain, and maybe the eastern parts of the Aleutians and the northern coasts for the Alaska Peninsula, and VFR for most of southeast. Pass conditions look like this. IFR should be the rule for most of Anaktuvuk Pass. You may see some improvement during the day. We may see MVFR conditions to start for Adigan Pass, with developing IFR as the day goes on. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass look pretty good. Watch for some convection and building clouds during the afternoon. Rainy Pass, we expect to see MVFR by late day. Windy Pass should be VFR through most of your Wednesday. Isabel Pass also expected to be visual flight rule through most of the day. Mentasta Pass we're going to call VFR with a chance for some showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon. Tanita Pass also looks to be pretty clear through most of your day. Portage Pass looks to be VFR, and Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see developing MVFR as the day goes on. It does not look like convection's a big chance there. Freezing level shows the colder air dropping southward. This is what I'm talking about with the Arctic kind of waking up a little bit. It's not quite open for business yet, but it's trying. Out across the north and western Gulf, levels as low as 6,000 to 8,000 feet around Kodiak Island, but we're still hanging on to a wealth of warm air with levels at or even above 12,000 feet for most of the interior, and even above 10,000 feet for parts of southeast. So no troubles with icing in most cases there, but there are some spots to watch out for below 5,000 feet across the Arctic coast, mainly for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast. There's some levels there with just enough moisture could reach occasional moderate, but the chance should be fairly limited. And then way high up, above 10,000 feet for eastern parts of the upper Yukon Valley, along the Alcan border, and way out west across the western chain above 10,000 feet. You might start to run into some light icing potential there. The jet stream shows the cooler weather trying to make its way out of the Arctic. That little dip right there helping to encourage that process starting. Wind speeds around 75 to 110 knots, and most of our weather right now is being controlled by the low pressure waves across the Gulf and the central and western parts of the Aleutians and eastern Pacific. And wind speeds around those disturbances are pretty tame at this point, only around 50 to 60 knots. You can see the trough of low pressure dropping into the Brooks Range, northwesterly winds behind that, and a larger circulation across the western Gulf. Those winds around 20 to 30 knots or so, and high pressure still in charge of the Bering, and that means we're getting a southerly and very light flow across the western chain and the western Bering. Northerlies develop at 3,000 feet across the western coast, 10 to 20 knots there, and a south and westerly flow feeding into the eastern Gulf at 15 to 40 knots. But by the time the winds reach southeast, most of those are coming in from the south and southeast at only about 10 knots or so. Wind speeds in the interior are still fairly light. So turbulence potential looks pretty tame tomorrow. Above 3,000 feet, a little bit of chop from the Brooks Range across the passes and eastward toward Kaktovik. Above 1,000 feet, just north and west of the Bering Strait, and also across the central and western chain. Most other concerns are negligible at this point. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather and another look at the sea ice edge here in just a few minutes.
This is a drill. This is a drill. This message is in support of the 2005 NOAA Safe Sanctuaries exercise. This is only a drill.
Emergency responders continue to address environmental impacts
From the 800-foot container ship aground on Elbow Reef in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Every year, NOAA responds to thousands of natural and human-induced incidents threatening life, property, and natural resources. During such incidents, NOAA is mandated to protect natural resources, provide weather data, and chart navigable waterways. To better fulfill this mission, NOAA conducted the first Safe Sanctuaries exercise in April of 2005 to bring together NOAA resources and expertise with other agencies for a hypothetical oil spill in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Briefly, the situation is, as we know, the MV Portsmouth Trader went aground on the Elbow. It's currently leaking fuel, and there's also a secondary release.
The Elbow is an outlying reef in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. This marine protected area is one of 13 marine sanctuaries and one coral reef ecosystem reserve in the United States. The Florida Keys is the nation's only living barrier coral reef. This exercise highlights NOAA's finest in emergency response and demonstrates its wide array of assets and capabilities. Under the Oil Pollution Act, the U.S. Coast Guard assumes the lead authority to direct an emergency response in the marine environment as the federal on-scene coordinator. In a significant incident such as this, the on-scene coordinator calls upon a cadre of specialists from around the country and assembles them in an incident command post, in this case, the Monroe County Emergency Response Center. Key among them is NOAA's Scientific Support Coordinator, who serves as a science advisor to the on-scene coordinator. For this exercise, the NOAA coordinator leads the environmental unit that will orchestrate the delivery of data and observations acquired from NOAA scientists and others. Among the initial information needed for the response is figuring out where the leaking oil is headed. The Scientific Support Coordinator dispatches an oceanographer to make real-time observations of ocean currents and oil movement at the grounding site.
Do you know if it's the north end or the south end where you're going to be dropping?
Northwest end.
She does this by dropping biodegradable dye pellets from the helicopter and photographs the dispersal of the dye.
90, 25.
I'm away. That's great sun angle. It's hard to see it though, I think.
This green dye mimics oil and gives the oceanographer an accurate view of sea surface currents.
Okay, got what I need.
When she returns, she immediately reports the information to the Scientific Support Coordinator in the Incident Command Post. They combine these observations with others in the environmental unit who have been working around the clock to respond to the oil spill.
There's this eddy right here.
As soon as the spill was reported, the Scientific Support Coordinator also requested a team from the Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and Services.
Got a counter pin for that, right?
Working with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary staff, they assembled and deployed a quick response buoy to collect real-time data at the wreck site. Using sound waves, this acoustic Doppler current profiling package measures ocean currents throughout the water column and transmits that information via satellite and radio straight into the command post.
Well, that's what we're showing here. We got 3 times of a knot measured.
Other team members monitor a pair of surface current mapper stations that were installed along the coast. These towers broadcast and receive high-frequency radio waves along the sea surface and provide another measurement of the surface currents, but on a wider scale. Process signals are also uplinked via satellite to the command post. The data from the surface current stations and current profiling buoy are verified with the aerial observations made on site by the oceanographer.
Anything that would indicate that, but I'm trying to think of, would I have seen it if it was there?
It might have been the water is so clear.
But more data are available and needed. The oceanographer also teams up with a meteorologist from the National Weather Service. He is a warning coordination meteorologist, and hourly he receives 2 critical updates on weather forecasts. One comes from NOAA's Weather Forecast Office in Key West.
Unlike yesterday with the true east direction that we might have expected, it looks like the models are indicating that it might be more of an east-northeast by early afternoon hours.
These are the local experts who understand the daily weather patterns in the Florida Keys and can make the most sense out of the information coming from NOAA satellites, radar, and their own observations. During a sensitive event such as an oil spill, the Key West office also dispatches an incident meteorologist dedicated to monitoring the weather specifically on the wreck site. With assistance from the sanctuary, the incident meteorologist installed a real-time monitoring system on the nearest accessible platform to the grounding site. This instrument transmits real-time observations of wind speed, wind direction, and temperature back to a small satellite dish that was set up in the Field Operations Center in Key Largo. With the most current data and frequent observations, the incident meteorologist prepares the second source of updates for the warning coordination meteorologist in the command post.
I have a forecast here ready to go. That's what I was just coordinating with the with your office there, and I can go ahead and send that to you in the next 10-15 minutes.
Integrating all the field data, the meteorologist presents the most current forecast back to the environmental unit. With all the real-time information now in hand, the Scientific Support Coordinator and Oceanographer contact NOAA's Scientific Support Team in Seattle, Washington.
Hey Tom, this is Debbie and Brad and Matt here.
Hey there.
Hey there.
Hey Bushy.
Mark Miller, CJ, and Bushy here on the warm-up.
At the vessel site, we did a die drop, and the currents were about 0.6, 0.7 of a knot to the north.
The team in Seattle will now work quickly to compile all the available data in computer programs and build a trajectory model for where the oil is expected to go. At least twice per day, the Seattle team updates the trajectory model. This critical information is faxed to the command post and delivered immediately to the Scientific Support Coordinator. Whenever there is new information available, the Scientific Support Coordinator and other NOAA specialists brief the Unified Command. The Unified Command is the lead group in the command post, composed of the Sanctuary Manager, the state and federal on-scene coordinators, and the responsible party for the ship grounding. The Unified Command and the Planning Unit will use the latest trajectory model and other information to best direct the course of field operations for the response.
I can point just like that. Here's a look at sea ice edge. Once again, like we were talking about, a lot of this is going to melt in place and kind of maybe shift a little bit more to the south and west. But the good news is if you're waiting for some of the ice to recede around the Hannah Shoal, probably by the weekend, our sea ice experts expect that a lot of that's going to be gone, if not completely gone. So the overall pack is shifting slowly to the south and west, but melting in place. And then later in the weekend, after the wind shifts, it might retreat a little bit more to the north and east. Right now, that could be some interesting news there for Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik, but you'll get a new analysis and information there as we head into tomorrow, and of course the sea ice is analyzed every single day. Here's a look at what's going on in southeast. Winds remain a little bit light from the south and east, 10 to 15 knots, a little bit faster up in the Lynn Canal, up to 25 knots, especially on the northern end by Wednesday afternoon with a 5-foot sea. A southwesterly flow could bring seas from 4 to 6 feet into Icy Bay and around Yakutat. Winds there around 10 knots. By Thursday, look for winds to parallel the coast, about a south and southeasterly flow, 15 to 20 knots in all areas, 5 to 6 foot seas on the outside and 3 to 4 foot seas on the inside with winds from the south and southeast, about 15 to 20 knots. For South Central, look for light and variable winds inside of Prince William Sound and easterly flow across the western Gulf at about 10 to 15 knots. Northeasterly winds on either side of Kodiak Island at 15 knots with 4-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait and 2 to 3-foot seas on a southerly flow coming up Cook Inlet at 10 to 15 knots. By Thursday, similar conditions in Cook Inlet with 3-foot seas there, a variable flow on either side of the Barren Islands and up the north and western Gulf. A variable flow continues inside of Prince William Sound. A nice day there with 2-foot seas and westerlies blowing off of Kodiak Island at 15 knots into the Gulf with 4-foot seas, and 3-foot seas continue inside of Shelikof Strait. Northwesterlies coming into the Bering Sea coast for the Alaska Peninsula at 10 to 20 knots with 3 to 7-foot seas there. and continuing on into the Pacific coast at 15 to 25 knots. Maybe a few areas seeing some brief gusts in the gaps. 5-foot seas expected there in the Pacific. That drops to about 4 feet as we head into Thursday with more of a variable flow developing, and inside of Bristol Bay, winds drop to about 10 knots with a 4-foot sea. Northwesterlies along the Bering Sea coast with seas holding around 6 feet. For the Aleutians, a north and easterly flow moving away from high pressure out across the western Bering. 15 to as high as 25-knot winds there, especially south of Unalaska and Nikolsky. 6-foot seas expected there by Wednesday. An easterly flow for the western chain, 15 to 20 knots with a 4 to 6-foot sea. By Thursday, winds come up a little bit more around Kiska to Adak with 25 knots to the east of that. 20 knots around Nikolsky to Atka with a southeasterly flow, 5 to 8-foot seas in those areas, and still holding onto a light and variable flow closer to Unalaska and south of the Pribilofs. Look for a 4-foot sea. For the west coast, northerlies coming down through the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region and into Kuskokwim Bay, about 20 to 25 knots with 4 to 6-foot seas. Northwesterlies in the western and central Bering, 20 to 25 knots with a 4 to 5-foot sea heading into the Pribilofs. And winds will diminish a little bit more in the northern Bering, down to 15 knots as we get into Thursday with 3-foot seas there, 4-foot seas outside of the Kuskokwim Bay area, and a light and variable flow around the Pribilofs with 3-foot seas expected for both islands as we head into Thursday afternoon. For the Arctic coast, north and westerly winds should remain light for the Beaufort Seacoast, and seas will be very small, maybe 1 to 2 feet tops. North and easterly winds behind the cold front, 10 to 15 knots there from Point Lay to Point Hope, but a little bit faster outside of Kotzebue Sound with the northerly flow at 25 knots. By Thursday, there's the wind shift, a north and easterly wind, southeasterlies blowing off the Chukchi Seacoast at 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 4-foot seas there. And they're still holding on to pretty small seas where the ice is open enough with 1 to 2-foot seas expected in the Beaufort with winds only around 10 knots on Thursday. That's a look at your marine forecast. Recapping tonight's weather, cooler air is dropping in out of the Arctic and heading for the interior tonight. This is just the first wave. Watch for some showers to develop along the mountains, a better chance for some light rain across the Gulf and southern parts of southeast with areas of light rain across the Brooks Range and the central and eastern parts of the coastal plain. Look for Thursday to bring a better chance of showers around the Alcan. Colder air tries to make it through the Alaska Range with showers developing there, and a front makes it into the central and western chain. The second round of cooler air drops into the Chukchi Seacoast as we head into Thursday. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.